A wine like this one, which is an Amarone Riserva Costa Sera, needs a big glass. It needs to sprawl, and that's why it takes a great big glass, so that there's a vast surface that comes into contact with air, allowing the wine to release the richness of its aromas. We can smell a cherry jam scent. There are concentrated fruit notes, and they're perfectly blended with sweet spices. There's a bit of cocoa powder or coffee. But we can also smell leather, cigar, dried mushrooms. When a wine is 30 years old, it's perfectly normal for it to have such features. The fruit notes are almost completely gone.
La frutta non ce l'ha quasi più. E poi in bocca un po' di tutto, subito si inizia a sentire.
But in the mouth, you can taste a little bit of everything. The most obvious thing is the flavor of red fruit. But it's not grapes. You don't taste the grapes. You taste the wine and you describe it through fruit notes. Because it essentially comes from a jam obtained by cooking the fruit over and over again. It reminds people of grandma's cherry pie or cinnamon pies or any other pleasant flavors. They're all hidden in one's olfactive memory.
Le ritrova nella sua memoria olfattiva, gusto olfattiva.
The story of the Oseleta grape is the story of a long-lost treasure retrieved at last. It's the story of a mystery finally solved, the story of a phoenix reborn from its ashes.
Everybody asked, where did you find it? It's gone. It was gone indeed. Nobody's searched for it anymore, because people could easily do without it. That's why I always say it was rediscovered. It would still be gone today if it wasn't for the miraculous rescue of biodiversity. This grape that was rediscovered managed to give new life to Valpolicella.
Darà una linfa nuova al Valpolicella.
When Sandro Boscaini, Mr. Amarone, told me the story of the Oseleta grape and how he managed to discover it almost by chance in the vineyard of a small winemaker, I honestly believed it was some kind of well-written fictional tale, a beautiful story from a writer's pen. But it was real. It really happened. This is the story of a long-lost grape. But it's also the story of a family, a company, and a wine that made the culture of time the key to their success. My name is Matteo Caccia. Welcome to the Magic of Time, 250 Years of Masi.
Siamo in Valpolicella.
We're in Valpolicella Classica, on the estate of Brolo, del Conte Serrego Alighieri. We're surrounded by biodiversity here, because we have an olive grove, we have cypresses, we have a vineyard, so we have a very diverse environment. We're about 20 kilometers away from Lake Garda, on the hills, and this is very important in terms of microclimate. Our vineyards go from 200 to 600 meters above sea level, so this biodiversity is an essential feature of our wines too, an essential ingredient. The Valpolicella Classica area covers 5 towns, and right now we're in a town called Sant'Ambrogio. In front of us, we can see the hills that frame the lake. There's Lake Garda, 20 kilometers away. And behind us, we have the Lessigna Mountains, which protect us from cold winds and provide us with constant ventilation, which is fundamental for wine growing, as well as for the appassimento process in traditional fruttai.
Poi di appassimento dell'uva nei fruttai tradizionali.
One of the most memorable moments during my stay in Valpolicella at the Masi estate was definitely the tour of the vineyard with Roberta Beber.
Di Roberta Beber.
L'agronomo è una professione che si realizza.
To become an agronomist, you have to follow a course of study. I studied viticulture and enology in high school for 6 years. And then I went on to university and attended a faculty of agriculture. And when I majored, I became an agronomist.
Permette di diventare appunto agronomo.
So this has been your passion since you were a kid, hasn't it?
Sì.
Yes. I basically grew up in a vineyard because my grandfather owned one. Nature's always been my passion anyway, and after high school, I decided to specialize in the wine sector.
Di proseguire in ambito viticolo.
I'm Roberta Beber. I'm an agronomist and I take care of the vineyards.
I vigneti.
Roberta Beber is a highly experienced agronomist. She went into detail about all things grapes and plants. When she speaks, it's almost as if she was talking about the plants in her own backyard. She explained what a grapevine is to me so vividly that she almost gave life to it.
La vite è una pianta.
A grapevine is a plant. In this case, it was cultivated using a Guyot training system. We mainly use 2 training systems in Valpolicella, the Guyot and the Pergola. The Oseleta grape, for example, was initially trained with both Guyot and Pergola in order for us to figure out its characteristics and its adaptability into various pedoclimatic circumstances. And in this case, we're standing in front of a Guyot-trained grapevine. Its trunk is 70 or 80 centimeters, which branch off into 2 spurs. They're there, on the sides, right and left. These spurs provide continuous phlegmatic flow all through the year. And this is what I do. I take care of the grapevines throughout their life cycle, from the budding stage in early April to the grape harvest in September or October. In the case of the Oseleta grape, the harvest season is late October. After that, there's a resting stage when we prune them. It happens in the winter, to make sure they're ready to thrive again the following season.
Vegetativa dell'anno successivo. La vite germoglia in primavera.
Grapevines sprout in the spring, in April. But before that, they go through what we call the crying stage. As we prune them, they release a liquid substance, which is their sap. It means that the grapevines are getting ready to sprout. Their roots are absorbing water, and the vines are coming alive again. And after the budding stage, when the grapevines start to sprout, there's a long resting stage. That's when we take over to carry out all those tasks that require great skill and craft, such as the pollarding process, during which we select the main buds.
Tutte operazioni manuali che richiedono grande attenzione e professionalità.
The Masi world and everything surrounding it is made up of people. People full of passion and expertise, like Roberta Beber, but also friends like Severino Barzan, founder of the Bottega del Vino.
To me, the Bottega del Vino is not a restaurant. It's simply the Bottega del Vino. When I took over, I thought it was public property, not private. It was a great satisfaction for me. It was going through a hard time, but I was able to bring the Bottega closer to its Veronese origins. After all, it embodies the history of Verona. My wife used to work behind the counter, and she used to have this bell. Whenever customers got a little unruly, she'd ring the bell and everyone shut up. That was the symbol of Verona, the Bottega del Vino.
Rappresentava Verona, questo era il Bottega del Vino. È più facile dire chi non è venuto.
We've had so many important people at the bottega, artists, singers, and even royalty. We once had the Queen of Holland. We also had Italian politicians. The most famous is probably Silvio Berlusconi and his family.
E anche la sua famiglia. Sono Severino.
I'm Severino Barzan, a retired restaurateur. My passion is wine, and still I work as a consultant in this field.
Che è la mia passione.
Severino Barzan is not just a wine expert. With his Bottega del Vino, he's made it possible for generations of wine lovers to get together. He's a cultural institution, and he also represents an important moment in Masi's history.
Around the time that I acquired the Bottega del Vino back in the 80s, in the late 80s, it was the 100th anniversary of the Bottega. It was actually 1990. That's when Masi and I began our collaboration. Every year I'd go up to Sandro Boscaini in his cellars and I'd select the best barrel for the Bottega. I had the wine bottled with a label indicating Riserva Bottega del Vino. I remember when we started to make magnum bottles. We actually made double magnums too. Sandro would often tell me that people wouldn't even drink half a bottle, but I insisted on magnums and double magnums. They were afraid to serve the Amarone at the table in the day, but I wasn't. I guess I was one of the first to serve the Amarone at table.
Parla tanto, però a quell'epoca no.
The Amarone was considered a meditation wine, a wine that you never drink. But the Amarone is actually a table wine.
Era un vino da tavola.
And like many others before him, when Severino Barzan talks about Masi and Amarone, he mentions the Oseleta grape and its rediscovery.
There was a rediscovery of those native varieties that we believed were long gone or completely unused, such as the Oseleta grape, the Croatina, the Dindarella, the Valpolicella. Masi, Sandro Boscaini, and I carried out a micro-vinification of these varieties at the Masi Research Centre, and that's how we discovered the Oseleta. When we presented it at a Vinitaly event, I realized that was the type of grape that I needed, and so we obtained our very first wine, the Toa. It was basically a Corvina with a touch of Oseleta. And after that came the Oza, which was Oseleta and Corvina. But I still wanted 100% Oseleta wine. Nobody supported the idea. They custom-made some bottles for me and for the Bottega, and that was it. Then one day I was having lunch with Sandro and some famous Italian journalist, and we compared the Coupage Oseleta with the pure Oseleta that I'd been keeping for 10 years. And Sandro said to me, "Once again, you're right."
E Sandro ha detto ancora una volta te avevi ragione te.
So the time has come for us to hear the story behind the rediscovery of the Oseleta grape. And like many other stories before, this one begins with an opened bottle.
I visited this farmer, this winemaker, who opened a bottle of the Amarone that he'd made. I tasted it and I was stunned. I asked, where did you get this grape? It's incredible. It was a strong wine, very tannic, very sour, as black as coal. And he said, well, I have this old grapevine down there, these grapevines. They make these grapes, and I just add a little bit of Corvina to them, and that's how I make it. I make 150 or 200 bottles of this for myself. And so I asked him what kind of grape it was, and he said, I don't know, some grape, I guess, some wild grape, I don't know. But I was curious and stubborn. And so the following year, I went back to visit him. And he took me to see these 4 grapevines that grew amidst some peach trees. I saw these grapes, but I didn't know what they were. I had a shoebox with me, though. And so I trimmed a little bunch and a couple of leaves, put them in the box, and I went straight to, it was late morning, and I went straight to Conegliano, Veneto. to consult with Professor Calò. I asked him, Antonio, what kind of grape is this? He took a look at it and he was pretty sure it was the Oseleta grape, but he wanted to be absolutely certain. So he got this book with all these different types of grapes and he said, this is the Oseleta. Where did you find it? Hold on, I said, let's discuss this. Then I went back to the winemaker and I tried to reach an agreement. I said, promise me this, I cannot register or copyright a variety of grapes because it's the patrimony of humanity, but promise me that you'll make sure I will be the first to replant it. And that's what came to be. He got some vine shoots for me, and I planted them and grew them at the experimental vineyards that we have here at San Floriano Agricultural Institute. We took care of it for years, from 1979 to 1985, till they finally gave us the okay to get the Mazze. That's what we call the vine shoots ready to be replanted. We planted these Mazze, we planted them in 3 different locations to monitor how the experiment went. Eventually, it was successful, and the rest is history.
This is the story of a phoenix reborn, the story of how a grape was saved from extinction. This is the story of an encounter on a winter's day around an open bottle when a farmer asked Sandro Boscaini to try his Amarone. And Mr. Boscaini savors a unique type of grape. A grape that tastes like the old days, like what his grandparents used to tell him about, like tradition. So Mr. Boscaini decided to do what he does best. He waits patiently till the following spring, goes back to the farmer, and asks to be shown around the vineyard. And that's where he saw it, the long-lost grape.
Nel 1990.
Back in 1990, I was still a student, and I made some extra money working during the harvest period. I helped this man. He was a technician. His name was Giuseppe Nicolis. He was part of the technical group, and he had to take care of these experimental varieties. I remember the Dinderella and the Oseleta. I also remember he had these 2 fermentation vats and told me that I had to monitor them during the fermentation process of the grapes. I had to monitor the temperatures at different times of the day, and I had to take care of the follatura process, which means to essentially keep the skin of the grapes wet at all times because they tend to come afloat due to the carbon dioxide produced during the fermentation, and they might get all the acetic bacteria. There was also this tank on the left, and on the right, this tank where they put lots and lots of grapes ready to be pressed. The other farmers who worked with me always joked, "Don't waste your time on that stuff. The Oseleta is as sour as poison." It was true, actually. It's such a tannic grape. It's so sour that you just want to spit it out as soon as you eat it. But if you know how to process it, how to process the right quantity, then you can obtain some great wine from it. Let's just take, for example, our Valpolicella Classica terroir. It's 10% Oseleta, and if we opened a vintage bottle from 1990, so over 30 years ago, the wine would still be alive. Any other Valpolicella without that grape is completely gone. It has no acidity. It's just as good as dead. But the terroir from 1990 is still very much alive.
Sono sicuro che se siamo un terroir del 90 è ancora vivo.
L'Oseleta messa in una barrica.
The Oseleta in a French oak barrel is definitely a possibility at Masi. There's a corner of the cellar where you can taste Oseleta grapes from 8 or 9 years ago, and they still taste fresh. The only downside is that you need a lot of money if you want to have a monoculture of Oseleta, because you can't sell it immediately. You need to wait 10 or 12 years.
Dopo 10-12 anni.
But the Oseleta has a much longer life than your average wine.
When we say that these grapes were rediscovered, we mean that Masi managed to bring back something that was long gone and to give it new life.
L'abbiamo piantate nell'85 noi.
Even though we planted it in 1985, the Oseleta didn't exist yet. It was added to the register of Italian grape varieties only later. And after that, it was added to the production procedural guidelines. So the first year of production was 1990, and only after 1995, after 10 years of cultivation, we made our first pure wine from it, called Osar.
Abbiamo fatto anche il vino in purezza proprio che si chiama Osar.
After this rediscovery, the wine world began to cast its eyes on such an ancient type of grape. But it wasn't long before another character came into play, an antagonist in the story of the Oseleta grape.
Devo dire che nel frattempo, subito dopo,
The Agricultural Inspectorate carried out a census right after our rediscovery. Apparently, they found 3 or 4 other vineyards up in the Garda Lake area, mostly pergolas like the one we have here. And these were pre-phylloxera vineyards. Now, phylloxerae are small bugs that live in the soil and erode the roots of plants. The vineyards that were not affected are 11 altogether. They're all pre-phylloxera, and they're right here in our yard.
11 viti pre-filosseriche qua dentro, nel cortile.
La fillossera è un insetto, un patogeno.
Grape phylloxerae are insect pests on grapevines both in Europe and America. They cause severe damage in European vineyards, both aerially and in the soil. They actually caused a substantial disappearance of European viticultures a long time ago, because people didn't use grafting back in the day. And so the vineyards were essentially ungrafted, which means that both the structure in the roots and the structure in the upper parts were European. The solution to this problem was the grafting of European varieties with American rootstocks. That's how they solved the problem.
Americano, e questo comportò quindi la risoluzione di questo problema.
Qua da noi è cominciato nel 12.
The first infestation here started in 1912 and went on till the 30s.
You were in trouble.
Big trouble, everywhere, until somebody found a solution. It was somebody from America who brought Californian grapevines to France. That's when they realized that those vines didn't get infested. So they started to graft European varieties with American varieties, which is what we still do, by the way. The roots are almost all American.
So any grapevine here in Europe has...
Yep.
Sì.
After talking about the rediscovery of the Oseleta, Sandro Boscaini discusses biodiversity in an official video on the company's YouTube channel. He actually has a message for Europe and for his fellow winemakers.
La biodiversità nel senso
Biodiversity in terms of variety is one of Europe's biggest strengths and one of our greatest lessons for the rest of the world. Making good or even excellent wine is not enough. It's also necessary for winemakers to produce wine with native varieties and grapes that embody the value of their lands and the identity of their people.
il valore delle loro terre e l'ingegno delle loro genti.
But before moving on to the next episode, where we'll talk about the appassimento process, I want to share with you Severino Barzan's motto. As he talks about the value of a simple glass of wine, he says,
There's more philosophy in wine than in all the books in the world. A glass of wine is life, is land, is culture. After all, a long time ago, somebody said, "This is my blood. Drink of it, all of you." He was talking about wine, wasn't he?
Ed era vino.